Now in this lesson we're going to talk about painting architecture, or putting houses in your painting, painting street scenes, putting architecture in the landscape, basically is what it is. And this is a painting by Emile Groupe, early mid-20th century landscape painter on the East Coast. Now when we look at a house, a structure like this, what we notice right away, aside from details, the shutters, the windows, the white lines, all those little details, the fence or porch posts, all the little railings. There's a lot of detail there we have to sort through. So we want to ignore every bit of it. And we want to see as big a shape as possible. And we always talk a lot about mass, want to mass in big shapes and use as little line as possible. And real quickly, what I mean by that is in a basic landscape here, I can use some lines to start the masses. In other words, I can use a line here to separate mountains from sky, and I'm just separating the plains, separating the hill from the bigger mountains, and then a simple line to separate the upright trees from the flat plane, so that I have my sky plane slanted, slightly slanted, not too much, and then my flat planes and my vertical planes. And I can start that with line, but as soon as I separate, I want to go to mass. In other words, I want to see these trees as a dark mass compared to the background trees. These trees way back in here is a darker blue-green mass compared to the mountain or the trees in front. So as soon as we can, we want to go to mass, because we simplify that detail and leave it till the end and keep everything as big and as simple as possible. And that's what we want to do here. So when I look at this, it's a painting, but if I look at it as a photograph, or if I'm outside painting, I don't want to follow an outline here, because the minute I do that, if I put a line down here, I have nothing to compare it to, and I don't know if it's the right angle, if it's too high, too low, because I don't have anything to compare it to. If I start with this, just a square and use a little bit of line, I'm going to go to the edge of the house and go up to the highest point. I'm going to ignore the chimney, and there's my square. I don't have to have perspective lines. But this is a square. I can see how much space is left in the sky, how much space here between the edge of the house and the edge of the canvas. And, you know, I'm talking about looking at a photograph or outside and deciding how big you want the house to be. But that gives me the shape, the proportion in the largest shape possible, and that's what we want to work with. So that if I start with that, and just basic shape, just like we look for basic value, then I know I want to break up this big square into maybe two squares, so that I'm having a line there. So I got a rectangle here. Then I want to break that rectangle up into shapes. They got a triangle here and a triangle here, where the point doesn't meet on the edge of the square. The point meets kind of in here, and that sets up my drawing a little bit more. Then all I have to do is look at lines. The lines on the house, slanted that way, slanted this way, and all I want to do is look for slant. I know that if I'm at eye level, if I'm standing right here, this is me, head and shoulders, looking, eye level is right here. Everything above eye level, as it goes away from me, and this side of the house is going away from me, these lines are going to angle down. So from this point they go down. From this point they go down even more severe angle. Now this is head on, so it's going to be straight. But with a photograph, what I want to look at is shape, and I'll get the shapes in there like I just did, and then for the angled lines I will eye it. Just see if I can tell which direction they're going. Then I'll hold the photograph up to it, step back. In my case, I've got a computer screen now, but it's right next to the painting. And I can step back 4 or 5 feet and just flip my eye back and forth. So if I want to see if this angled line is right, this angled line, the line for that, All I have to do is step back and then flip my eye back and forth from the photograph to the painting. Now the photograph does have some distortions sometimes, so you have to allow for distortions. But I know everything above eye level, as it goes away from me, will angle down. Everything below eye level will angle up, which means that if this house was sitting way down here, then the line would angle up this way instead of down. But that's the kind of the basic 1 and 2 point perspective. It's not really hard to understand. There's no math involved because I don't know math at all. But you can buy, if you go on Amazon and type in artistic perspective, and it has to be artistic, otherwise you get some mathematical stuff. They have several small books ranging from $2 to $6 to $8, maybe a bit more, that give simple explanations for artistic perspective, and they're very good. And that's real helpful. All I did in art, although in art school we had to do architectural rendering, that really helped me just to get a simple, basic understanding of artistic perspective. It's not like color. It's not like Jello nailing it to a wall. It's very concrete, simple, and then the more you apply it to the painting, the more you understand it. This is another painting by Emile Groupé. And again, if we apply the same thing, the outer edge cross here to this outer edge, and that gives me my square. Then I can connect here, then I see the triangle which moves away from me. In other words, it's pointing this way instead of pointing right at me, right there. So I know the line is angled down a little bit. And I got the shape of the roof. I got the shape of this rectangle here. Break it down to real simple shapes, but don't follow an outline that goes all over the contour of the building. Break it up into shapes, and then what's important after that is just value. Like we talk about everything else, value is more important than color. And when I look at this, just the white part, just the square house with the roof, I got a light, a dark, and this is actually sunlit here, this roof, even though it's darker than the shadow. It's darker than the shadow because it's a different color. It's a darker color and the house is white. But simple values. Same thing with this thing. This is a light area here, and you make the comparison that it's darker than this, and the shadow over here is darker than that. So get the right value, compare it to other values, and then on top of that comes windows. Same thing with this other house. These windows are painted right on the dark yellow and light yellow. He didn't paint around the window, or he didn't paint around this white woodworking stuff there. Again, you don't want to paint around small stuff. Small stuff, detail goes on top. These little white things in the window, that's on top. You don't want to necessarily paint around them. Same thing with the porch, although he painted around this, you can tell by the bare canvas there. But generally, you want to paint small stuff on top of big stuff. Don't paint around little things because it messes up your brushwork. Now this is a painting by Arthur Streeton. He was an Australian painter. You can see the simplicity here of this house. He's got value change from here to here, here. So he's got 2 darks, 3 darks, and 2 or 3 lights. Very simple. Shape is very simple. Again, if I was painting what he was looking at here, I would start on the outside edge, go to the highest point, not counting the porch and the chimney, and get my square, and then start breaking it up. I got a triangle, I got a rectangle there that's at an angle, rectangle here that's at an angle, then I can cut in for the porch. So I'm thinking in shape instead of trying to render detail. And I always do better if I can draw flat shape, which is what I think of here as I'm drawing the triangles, the big rectangles, just a flat shape on each side. And generally in a house you're going to see 2 sides. 2 sides of both the house and the roof. You're not going to see 3. So each side has a shape to it, and all I want to do is draw that shape. I don't want to have to worry about perspective lines. If I'm doing architectural rendering to sell a house, I'm going to set up my perspective. But in painting, it's always a lot better not to overuse perspective for painting. Painting's about shape, value, in color. But you can see the simplicity here of this tree. Maybe 2 values. Everything is just a basic shape. There's no detail in the porch. Now the shadow here is pretty warm because the sunlight is hitting here and bounces up into the porch, and that warms it up, where generally the shadow would be cool on a sunny day. But what I like about his paintings, and he's a good artist to look at. Google his name and see his work. Very simple. And he spends all his time getting the right relationship between the sky, roof, tree, flat plane, slanted. Very little detail. A lot of perspective lines, so I'm going to have to break it down again into more just shape than outline. In other words, I don't want to have to use an outline and be precise on this. I would rather see a shape here and then start breaking up strokes of dark and light. So I would establish a square here on the porch, break it up into a front side, or the front of the porch and the side of the porch, front, side, top, front, just big simple shapes. And the more I break it up, the smaller I can get detail-wise. But my goal here is to suggest the light. My goal isn't to be super accurate, but I like what I see here. I like what the light's doing. So I'm going to use bigger shapes to suggest the light. One thing I will do after finding the shadow pattern, and the shadow pattern looks like this also makes it easier to draw. Because again, I've got a square shape here, and I've got a definite, of course I'd start square and then start to break it up, but I've got shapes here. If I can just get those shapes down as a silhouette, that takes care of perspective lines. I'm not tied to this idea of having to draw perspective. But I've got simple shapes of light and dark here. And if I can draw this on my canvas lightly, a little bit of line, but fill in these dark shapes, using some line as well to modify it, it's going to go a lot faster and make it a lot easier. Because again, I'm seeing shape instead of outline. And that's the key. Same thing with the porch, like on these railings here. I don't want to outline them and fill it in. I could either block it in all shadow and then chop in a few lights, or block it in all light and chop in a few dark shapes. Big mass instead of detail. And there's a lot of things I would eliminate. I'd eliminate the 2 statue guys here. No interest in them. Probably the house back in here. And just simplify these shapes. I would want to make a shape here, these trees, that looks more interesting maybe in the photograph. And maybe layer-wise, so that I have foreground house, the middle ground trees here. And I would get rid of these trees. They're just poking in from out of nowhere. Then I might have background hill just to give one more layer of depth. Or I could lower it or raise it or whatever. So very, very, very simple. And my goal will not be to match the color. I really don't care about the color of the house. I might have a lot of violets in here with a lot of alizarin scrubbed into it, or violet and orange, and I would probably darken these shadows on the house a bit more. I think the camera picked up in the light areas and got too light, and then in the light areas and got too light, and went a little too light in the shadows as well, with the exception of in here. Those are real dark. But the cameras are usually off value-wise, so we want to be able to correct that.